Welcome, everyone, to Civil Disobedience TV. I'm George Donnelly. Today is Martin Luther King Day, as decreed by the federal government. Some people want to make Martin Luther King about service. That's fine if people want to serve, but frankly, I'm more interested in disobeying unjust laws, and I think that's more what Martin Luther King's legacy is about. My next guest is Rich S., and he's joining us from Skype. Hi, Rich. How you doing?
Hi, pretty good, George.
It's a real pleasure to have you on today. So, Rich, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Do you consider yourself an activist?
Yeah, definitely an activist. Probably was much more of an activist 20 years ago, but still involved in the Libertarian Party and Ron Paul and other things. Not quite the anarchist as some people, but definitely a libertarian activist.
Excellent. So, what unjust law or illegitimate authority have you disobeyed?
Well, it was illegitimate authority, and it happened in Philadelphia, right outside the TLA, the Theater of the Living Arts on South Street.
Uh-huh.
I'd noticed for some time when I went to shows that the cop the crowd after a show. And, the shows I go to are not, like these crazy things with lots of rambunctious kids or anything. It's mostly a 40s or older crowd, and people are very, very peaceful. And one or two previous instances, I had some nice discussions with the police. But and they were very civil about that. Just saying they were getting their instructions from the theater and such. But then on one evening, it was in May of 2005. I wasn't. I was at the TLA actually hoping to hook up with a friend of mine who had come down from New York to see a show there. He didn't have a cell phone. And when I got to the TLA, it was about 11:30 on a Saturday. There was no round. I mean, well, the show was gone. I walked up to the theater, couldn't hear any sound coming from inside. There were about 4 or 5 police officers standing right outside the theater, and I didn't think much of them. And I noticed that the TLA had a listing of upcoming events located in one of their placards right outside the entrance. So I walked over to see who was coming. I wasn't at this sign for more than 5 seconds when one of the cops started hollering at me, "Hey, you!" And not thinking he's speaking to me, he's like, "You got to move along. You got to move along." Well, I'm didn't read the sign. I don't know. I mean, it just seemed kind of like he was overstating his authority. So I said, "Well, why? Why do I have to leave?" And he's like, "Well, I'm telling you have to leave." And I said, "Well, what law am I breaking?" And at that, he said, "I've told you 3 times now you have to leave. You don't want me to tell you a fourth time."
Huh.
So I actually started very slowly to walk away. And I again asked him, I said, "Well, I'd like to have your name and know what law I'm breaking." And at that, he'd heard enough. And he and the other 3 cops, led by him, he just like basically pounded and they do their little tie things on them, and next thing I know that I'm being arrested for
Wow.
just questioning why I couldn't peacefully stand outside the theater and read the sign that was put there so that people would come look at it to see who's coming.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of a 4 or 5 month ordeal. And at that point, I'm saying to the cops, "Hey, well, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong?" And they're just being, all cocky and belligerent, and, like, oh, yeah, well, you'll find out. You'll find out. And they searched me. They took my wallet. But they pulled me away from about maybe 50, 25 yards or so, because I'd had my bike with me, but I wasn't riding my bike. I was walking my bike, so there was no infraction with the bike. But meanwhile, they pull me like away, and my bike didn't get up, with nobody watching it. And I start complaining, "Hey, what about my bike? What about my bike?" And they're like, "Don't worry about your bike. Don't worry about your bike." I said, "Well, I am
Huh.
worried about it. It's a $500 bike, and nobody's watching it." So
Yeah.
one of the officers at least went and got the bike, and next thing I know, they got a paddy wagon coming, and
Wow. That's just crazy.
uh,
Just for standing
they
there
throw
and
me in the
reading a
paddy
sign.
wagon at about this time. These two other, oh, it's totally crazy. Yeah, of course, I'm not going to come by. I'll say no to Russia, which of course is not true. During the days of the Soviet Union, and you could read signs without being, thrown in jail. Who would have thought in this country that somebody could go to, be arrested for reading a sign and stuff, but they weren't going to hear it. I felt bad because these two other young kids had stopped. I was like, well, they got arrested too, just for asking what was happening to me. So
Oh,
next thing I know, the three of us and my bicycle are all put inside the paddy wagon, and we're driven to the police station at 10th and South Streets. And we're kind of having a laugh about the kids. The guys saying at them because it's a police station, and they chained my hand to like a metal post there. It was actually more
wow.
comfortable behind my back, but whatever. And they're there saying, "Oh, it's only going to take 15 minutes." And I kept saying, "Well, what did I do? What did I do?" And they're like, "Oh, you'll find out." That kept being their answer. You'll find out.
You'll find
So,
out.
but then as it turns out, their computer system goes down.
Oh, no.
So they were in the middle of processing this one older guy there, and I wish I could have had a recording of this because the guy just wanted to read, the thing that they'd given him before he signed it, and they start screaming and hollering at him, you just sign it, we're going to throw you in the roundhouse, all this stuff, and then at that point their computers go down, and none of these guys had any idea what to do with me and the other two guys there because they're making phone calls, and this is at midnight. It's now 12:30, Saturday night, Sunday morning. There's nobody they can call, and
Oh,
this is
man.
going on and on and on, and we're just sitting there, and they can't process us. And I'm like saying, look, guys, you're gonna have to make an executive decision and just let us go. I said, I promise I'll come back tomorrow morning. I won't read any signs between now and then. I promise you, you can finish then, but they weren't taking too well to my sarcastic comments. So finally, this one cop who was there, and he says, I said, what did I do? What did I do? He goes, you want to know what you did? I said, yeah, I want to know what I did. And he says, you didn't obey the instructions of the police officer.
Oh,
So I was like,
brother.
oh. I said, is that it? So I said, so if a cop told me to jump off a bridge, I'd have to do it? And he says, well, no, obviously you wouldn't have to do that. And I'm like, going, oh. So what you're saying is, there is a line that has to be crossed. I said, could that line possibly be the law? I said, so like if a cop asks me to do something that he doesn't have the legal authority to do, I don't have to do it. Well, this was getting me nowhere. I mean, 2 hours go by, and somehow their computer system comes back up, and they're able to finish processing me. And finally, as I'm leaving the place, they hand me the piece of paper that supposedly says what I did wrong. And of course, it's full of lies. It's like, the cop there wrote up this whole story, that, oh, there was this crowd of people and I was impeding traffic. And none of that was true. I mean, it was dead quiet there. They had simply ushered everybody out. Maybe there had been a crowd there 5 minutes before I arrived, but upon my arrival, there was nobody there. And then it finally did list the law that I was supposedly, guilty of breaking, and it was, such and such a section, and it was failure to disperse.
Oh,
And
brother.
so I had to go home. I had to go home and look up the law, and it says where 3 or more persons are engaged in disorderly conduct, blah, blah, blah. Now, these other two kids, they came on the scene after I was already in handcuffs. They were not part of the 3. They were even arrested by a different officer. And so I know everyone likes to say, oh, that's the 3. They arrested those other 2 people to make it 3. No, the cops aren't that bright. They weren't thinking that. I'm thinking, okay, here's the law. This is an open and shut case. It says 3 or more people. I was alone, and I certainly wasn't being disorderly. So, of course, where they get you, though, is the court. You have to go to court Monday morning at 8:30. They tell you to be at court at 8:30 Monday morning. And, I get there at 8:30 Monday morning. They don't even start the proceeding until 11 o'clock.
Oh,
I've called
jeez.
and, I've let my work know I'm not going to be in. And it's just a total, assault on my time You know, and they just don't care. You know, the way they treat you in the courthouse, they treat everybody like a criminal. They're screaming and hollering. I mean, it's crazy the disrespect you get. You know, at one point they call you into, you know, individually into a room and they explain what's going to happen. My case was a summary offense, which means that I'm not eligible for public defender or anything. And it would be a simple $180, what's a $25 fine plus court costs, which would bring it up to about $200. And if I wanted to plead guilty, I could, and I would be given 30 hours of community service.
Oh, brother.
And that was my major objection. It was like, you know, it's one thing to pay a $200 fine, which is substantial, but the 30 hours of community service, you know, if you value your time, that's like slapping another $1,500 worth of my time onto the fine.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they keep you in the courtroom all day. They make you hear all the cases, everything, until the last thing they do are the arraignments. So it's not until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And by this point, I'd already called my boss. Just said, look, I just want to leave and forget this whole thing. They can put a bench warrant out for me. I don't care. And he's like, no. He was totally on my side, which was cool. He's like, you got to fight this. This is wrong. So I plead not guilty. They give me a trial date. And it's like, off I go. You know, I called a couple of attorneys, but they all wanted $500. And I'm like, it doesn't seem worth it to me to get an attorney to spend $500 to save a $200 fine. And I saw the way the attorneys work. They all work for the court. Mm-hmm. You know, in every case, they try to come sort of what would have happened. I know what would have happened in my case. They would have taken the $200 fine, and they would have dropped the community service. Yeah, you know, that would have been my victory. And so the employer would have gotten $500, the city would have gotten $200, and, you know, I'd be out $700. So anyway, so it's another day in court. I go from my trial, and I have Judge Frank Palumbo Jr., who's related to the Palumbo family. He used to own Philadelphia. I looked this guy up. I mean, it's all bad news about this guy.
Oh, man.
You know, everything you find about him. And it was basically, you know, again, you have to wait a whole nother day. You know, my trial came up, you know, sometime around 12 noon, but I'm there all morning. And basically the cop got to speak and said all his mumbo jumbo about, there was this crowd of people, you know, yelling at us. I mean, none of this was true. And then, you know, the judge just goes, okay, you're guilty.
Oh.
I mean, I hadn't even said a word yet. And I said, excuse me, do I not get to state my case? And, you know, this is like, you know, it's one case, next case. You know, the bailiff was already trying to push me out. He heard the magic word guilty from the judge, and, you know, the fine, $200, 30 hours community service. So the judge stops. He says, well, I suppose if you can make a legal argument. And I'm like, well, yeah, I think I can. And he goes, all right, I'll listen to you if you want to make a legal argument. And I said, well, let me just first say what the officer is saying is not true. I said, it was not a crowd night. There were no people around. Immediately, the officer says, and the judge says, yeah, I have a hard time believing that. I'm like, these two guys are now basically bearing witness against me. Neither one was at the scene. And I said, be that as it may, I said, let me give you the law. So I read the law. I said, I was by myself. I was alone. And he says, an interesting one. So he says to the prosecutor, what about, you know, this law, 3 or more persons? The prosecutor says, well, there have been many cases that have shown where the law says 3 or more people, 2 of the people don't actually have to be present. And the judge says, oh, yeah, that's right. Okay.
That is just ridiculous.
What about the disorderly conduct? Oh, it's totally ridiculous. I said, what about the disorderly conduct? I certainly wasn't being disorderly. And so the judge again asked the prosecutor, what about disorderly conduct? The prosecutor says nothing. And I'm thinking, okay, you know, they don't have an answer for this one. And the judge finally, you know, only lets about 4 seconds of nothing go by. And then the judge starts speaking, and he goes, you know, I never really liked the way this law is. On about this, and I'm thinking, okay, he's going to reverse himself. And he says, you know, but, you know, I can't rewrite the law for you, so you're guilty. I'm like thinking, you can't rewrite the law for me. You basically just said. I mean, I stated what I said, I decided that I'd been behaving in disorderly conduct, and you just named me guilty. So I'm
That's
like an emotional
absolutely
wreck at this
insane.
point. I'm very upset by the whole system, but I decide to appeal it. You get a new court and a new judge in common pleas, and this time it'll be a court of record. So if the judge says anything stupid like I can't rewrite the law for you, and then rewrites the law, or attempts to make me guilty without even listening to my case as he originally did. So I show up in court. This is another 3 months later. You show up in court first thing in the morning, and you're there waiting. And I thought I got tired of waiting. I was just like, I'd had it. The cop shows up. I see him in the front of the room with the other cops, and he's acting all smug, and he's like laughing. Look at this guy. He got a $25 fine. He's fighting a $25 fine. And, it wasn't a $25 fine. It was the principle of the thing, the
Yeah.
fact that I wasn't guilty of anything, and that these guys are being overbearing in their job on South Street. So essentially, I just got so fed up. I couldn't wait anymore. And I finally went up to the guy who was like the bailiff, court, and started. I said, what happens if I leave? At that point, I was about to throw in the towel and say, I'll pay their stupid fine. I know people who run community service organizations. They would have just signed the note for the community service or whatever it was. I know people who run some nonprofits, and I could have gotten away with that. Anyway, he says to me, no, don't do that. I'll call your case first. He asked me my name, and I felt guilty, like I didn't deserve special treatment. But what the heck? So they did. The judge came in, and they called my case first, and it was the same exact story. The cop got up there, lied. But then at least she said, okay, what is your version of the events? And I said, the funny thing is the exact same thing happened. I said, well, it was crowded on South Street at the time I was there. And again, the prosecutor and the judge both say, that can't be a Saturday night on this block of South Street. It was. So I read the law. They didn't have a copy of the law. Neither the prosecutor nor the judge had a copy of the law there, so they took my copy that I printed off the end of it. And so basically then I was as shocked as could be. The judge said to the prosecutor, do you have anything to say about this? And this time the prosecutor said nothing, and the judge started lecturing me about how what I did was very unwise, and the police in the city have a very, very difficult job to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I mouthed off to a cop, and that I owed the officer an apology. She goes, and bearing that, she goes, but I don't find you in violation of any statute.
Nice.
So that was the music. But I want you to apologize to the cop. Well, in hindsight, I did the wrong thing at that point. I mean, I just spoke into the microphone, said sorry, and that was it, and I was free to go, and the case was over. But it had just so shaken me up that I kind of wished that I had more, more will of the fight in me at that point. And I said, you just said that I was not in violation of the statute, and this officer should be apologizing to me.
Yeah.
And seeing where it would have taken it. I mean, she was on record saying I hadn't violated the statute. Was she going to hold me to an apology at that point? But
I mean,
on the other hand,
it took a lot of gumption to get as far as you did in the process. Most people aren't going to do that, and I salute you for resisting that. I mean, that was just excellent.
Yeah, it's something that I kind of had wanted to do for some time, but I got to admit it's not as much fun as you think it might be. And I'm glad in the end I did win my case. I thought maybe I should sue them, and I know people have successfully sued them for false arrest or things like that, and actually won substantial cases, but and even some monetary awards have been going their way, but I was just like, it's over. Let me move on.
Yeah. All right, well, Rich, that was just an amazing story, and I thank you for sharing it with us here on Civil Disobedience TV. Have a great day, and thanks again.
That was my pleasure, and I really appreciate all the work that you're doing too, George. So keep it up.
Thank you, Rich. Talk to you later.